So my name's Emily. I'm a PhD student with the Storylab Research Institute at Anglia Ruskin University, and I'm also a part-time digital media production lecturer at the same university at the Cambridge School of Art. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about some of my PhD research, focusing on playing the past using WebXR to rebuild the lost city. This is part of my PhD research, the full question: Spectres, Storytelling and Seabold, can interactive narrative-driven virtual heritage rebuild the lost city of Dunwich? Addressing the research question, how does working with open source software and repositories improve the sustainability of virtual heritage? We'll unpack some of these terms, WebXR and a few others as we go on. I'm also today accompanied by the ambient noise, hopefully my microphone's not picking it up, of my next door neighbour's barbecue. So let's get into what the lost city is. The lost city is the term for Dunwich, or how it's now affectionately been known to be referred to. Dunwich in its heyday back in the 13th century was second only to London due to population and its riches coming in from its harbour and trade. Now Dunwich is referred to as the Lost City because much of it is underwater. It's sometimes referred to as Britain's Atlantis for those interested in underwater cities. It's commonly known because of that. If you ever get the chance to visit Dunwich, it's a small village on the East Suffolk coast. Much of it is underwater, so spoilers, there's not a lot to see, and it is also disappearing at a rate of 1 metre per year, so get your skates on if you're keen. There's a museum in Dunwich, and as you go in, you're greeted by this papier-mâché model, I think it is. Whilst I'll be talking about some high-tech technologies, let's face it, you can't beat a bit of papier-mâché. So we have a yellow dotted line. This model dates back to the 1980s, so this model is out of date. This line should be further back. Everything this side, south side of the slide, is underwater. So Dunwich has lost countless churches, hospitals, a market square, etc. Due to various storms which took chunks out of Dunwich and what we now know to be rising sea levels and global climate crisis, Dunwich lost a lot of its trade to neighbouring port coastal towns and has now become depleted to a small village of less than 100 humans. So this research explores the story of Dunwich. It is the city that fell into the sea, and the outcomes archive the lost and vulnerable environmental heritage of Dunwich. If it wasn't obvious already why Dunwich and why now, it is because most of it's disappearing. This research works with the power of stories to communicate the virtual heritage developed and enable Dunwich to survive virtually before it's completely submerged under the North Sea. There's a really interesting quote which I'll paraphrase from Eric Champion, and that is that any sort of digital heritage shouldn't disappear before the heritage it's actually depicting. I believe I stand a good chance that the digital virtual heritage that I'm creating will outlive Dunwich because of the rate it is disappearing. However, due to workflows that I'm developing, I'm wanting to make this last as long as possible to make it sustainable. I've got another quote on this slide, which is: the storyteller and audience operate in a multimodal space, as digital narratives offer us the opportunity to enact stories rather than to merely witness them. And that quote comes from a really interesting human. Obviously, I'm going to say any humans mentioned in this slideshow are interesting, but I think this human in particular, Janet Murray, in the text Hamlet on the Holodeck, this is the updated 2016 version it's from. It's the idea of going beyond merely witnessing them, rather than being passive like you might with your Netflix or whichever. The idea that working with immersive multimodal spaces, we can have a bigger, larger, interesting, whichever word you want to insert in that sentence, impact on our audience member. The image on the right here, anyone who's familiar with the text Rings of Saturn, which influences this PhD, by W.G. Seabold, get my words right order, is from Thomas Browne's text, which influenced W.G. Seabold. And apologies for my dodgy Latin, it's called a quincunx, and it's this idea of a series of nodes in sort of nature and the idea of being networked together, which I see as being very interesting in terms of creating a constellation of stories that orbit the lost city surrounding Dunwich's geographical and historical past, and having this series of nodal points interconnected. And the idea, as you explore this WebXR space, you're seeing that your actions could potentially have an impact, be it positive or negative, on that environmental heritage that this work seeks to protect. So what is Greyfriars, and where do the ghosts come in? Greyfriars, it's a medieval friary in Dunwich, and whilst there's loads of different ghost stories, I was spoilt for choice to choose from, being an underwater city, notably spoilt for choice with ghosts. I've chosen to focus on an Elizabethan ghost who's a rare sighting. The story goes their house fell into the sea during a particularly bad storm in the 16th century, and you'll see them frequenting the cliffs around Greyfriars, and that this light will go out into sea. And the idea is that arguably that human ghost is looking to retrieve their home. So working with WebXR, this piece will explore developing a toolkit for virtual heritage to create Dunwich and share it via WebXR so that humans can be remotely or asynchronously present in this virtual space and explore the story of this ghost and also the history about what happened to the downfall of both Greyfriars and to Dunwich. Some quick definitions of virtual heritage. So some earlier ones from humans Robert Stone and Keo Ojika define virtual heritage as the use of computer-based interactive technologies to record, preserve or recreate artefacts, sites and actors of historic, artistic, religious and cultural significance to deliver the results openly to a global audience in such a way as to provide educational experiences through electronic manipulations of time and space. I think that's a very interesting explanation, especially in the context of WebXR, the idea that although this was from 22 years ago, this definition at the millennium, electronic manipulations is particularly interesting. Whereas Champion argues virtual heritage is the attempt to convey not just the appearance, but the meaning and significance of cultural artefacts and associated social agency that design and use them with interactive and immersive digital media. It's this social agency that I think sits Champion's definition. Other definitions of virtual heritage are available, but particularly the social agency, and I'm going to get on to something later discussing ideas about avatars and being a mediated presence with virtual heritage that I think is particularly pertinent to this work. So what is WebXR? I'm not going to go too deeply into this, however, I'm just going to give a brief overview. In simplest terms, it's an API for web content. It enables you to interface with hardware that you might have. Apparently 6% of humans in the UK have a VR headset. That was in 2020, so that number might have increased. 97% of us, however, in the UK have a smartphone, so more of us probably have a smartphone than a VR headset. That the WebXR API can enable you to interface regardless of that hardware you've got, so long as it can run a modern web browser. I'm sure you all have a preferred web browser, so that can interface and you can still experience that and it will run in a frictionless way. No downloading of software, no publishing and trying to get permission on app stores, whether it's Meta or paying to publish on Steam. One click, publish, and you're there. The chosen platform for this research is called Mozilla Hubs. It started in its early days as an experience called Hello WebXR and has since grown into Hubs. And I'm going to speak a bit later about why I think Hubs is particularly useful and why I chose it for this research. But to give some context as to how this research started, how it's going, and where it came to be today. This research started back in the middle of peak lockdown in the UK. We were inside, couldn't leave, and I really wanted to work with developing a lidar scanner, and since realised they're very expensive. Around this time you can get a lidar scanner on an iPad Pro, however, being reluctant to invest in an Apple device and in that global capitalism, decided why not try and build my own. Whilst many people probably don't have a 3D printer on their kitchen table, I did. And thanks to my partner's vast consumption of coffee, I had quite a lot of coffee jars that I thought made interesting vessels. So here is the homebrew lidar scanner, which I developed with some support from a human called Rich at Collusion, an arts organisation based in Cambridge. It worked, it had some functionality. I did think it was broken until I left it on overnight, and it did capture most of the kitchen eventually, but it was very slow. Fast forward to January 2022, and with the help of Professor Kurt Walford at Anglia Ruskin University and the support to use this industry standard Leica BLK360 scanner, I went from taking a few thousand points to build a point cloud into a few million, quite literally quite a massive jump in those numbers. A point cloud was chosen over a mesh because it had that sort of ghostly feel. However, this workflow does include how you might make a mesh out of this instead. So the idea is you capture data, whether that's with a snazzy whizzy scanner or one you've built on your kitchen table, or maybe it's via some apps on your smartphones. Photogrammetry is a very common way of creating some models. Once you have that data, there are open source pieces of software that you can use. I have a leaning towards Cloud Compare just because I prefer the user interface. However, you could equally use MeshLab for this. That was then imported into Blender so that I could convert it into a file format that was web friendly, so GLTF, GLB, which Mozilla Spoke was happy with. You could import those files into Mozilla Spoke directly, or you can also, you may have come across Sketchfab, you can import directly from within Mozilla into Sketchfab. So Spoke is, I'm going to get onto Spoke into the next slide, so I'll pause on that for a moment. Hubs is a social VR experience, and that's where you publish and share your experiences, and you can invite people into that. I'll explain a bit more about why I think avatars in that space are important in a minute. So this is what Spoke looks like. To me, this looks like a very simplified games engine. The idea that you can drag and drop different elements into your virtual space and explore them and test them just in a few clicks. There's no cost to this, which is amazing. However, if you're wanting to have a bit more control over the look and feel of it when it's published, you can of course host it on your own AWS server. I won't go into too much information about that, but if that is something you are interested in because you want particular branding for your cultural institution, that is also possible. So this is what it looks like. You've got built-in elements, 3D models that you could drag in and import from Sketchfab, an architecture kit, which honestly is like addictive virtual Lego. You can put in sound in here and build a sort of spatial audio and experiment with it. It's very powerful for something based in the web browser, and that's why I've chosen Mozilla Hubs. This is a preview of an early model imported into Mozilla Hubs and tested at my university's postgraduate research conference earlier in the year. And here you can get an idea of what avatars look like in the space. Mozilla has a built-in library of avatars that you can choose from. My favourite one, obviously, for this is the ghost. However, you can see here that you can be in a Christmas jumper any time of the year. You can be an astronaut, you can be a panda. And the idea of being an avatar in this space, I think this is something Champion also alludes to and is interested in. An area that I think is underexplored in virtual heritage is the presence of others in a virtual space. And this research seeks to open up, discuss why is that important, what is the overall impact on that. So what's next for this work? I want to explore what the impact is in exploring this site as an avatar and what the links are with, I've already been looking into a lot of video game theory in order to explore this. How does exploring a site with other humans remotely present impact your experience? Does it change your attitudes and behaviours? So we'll be looking at a lot of user testing and borrowing methods from digital ethnographic practice in order to explore this and monitor this. And then finally, what is the impact of being in a remote or mediated contact with a site over in person? We've all become quite used to being remotely present, and it's often been cited as maybe that's a lesser than, or a copy is often seen as not so good. But given our cultural institutions have massive archives, I think there's a rich opportunity to enable participants to create and curate their own spaces that they can share with humans to open up fresh conversations around particular collections. So thank you for watching this. If you have any questions, you are welcome to get in touch. Obviously, there's only so much that I can do in about 15 minutes of discussing this, but this is dunnage. If If you do get the chance, do visit it before it disappears.